So my name's Todd. My GM name was Caphys, Caphys, I think. And actually, I was a GM on Bichon. So some of you may remember me from those days, as I had to govern the politics between FOH and the various Asian guilds at the time. So that was pretty fun. But actually, that name comes from my guide name. I actually was a guide in Beta 4, so 1998. And I was a guide on Fen and Row. So that was where that name came from. And it was basically they were told, oh, you have to pick a new name. You can't use your play character's name. And I think I hit the random name generator a few times for like Barbarian, and then I modified a few characters, and that's what stuck.
Always a barbarian, right?
Pretty much, yeah. So Barbarian Warrior was my initial, yeah, pretty much Barbarian Warrior because, like, again, with whole GM and spellcasting and stuff, having an actual spellcaster as your GM kind of screwed up your character sometimes. So it's just easier to pick a non mana class.
Right on. And so from there, that was before I met you, because I didn't get there till early 2000.
Yeah, so I started at Variant in August of 1999. I basically it was kind of this is one of those stories I tell people, like they ask, well, how did you get into the game industry? And I'm like, I'll tell you my story, but don't do what I did because it was pure luck. Um, I had basically how I got introduced to EverQuest was uh, I was helped some friends start up an internet cafe back in the Illinois area near St. Louis, and one of the friends of the family they were big into muds, D&D, stuff like that, and we were tinkering around with a circle mud back then, and one of my friends was like, hey, I'm playing this game, I'm in beta, you want to check it out? And so it was beta 3 of EverQuest. And since we had an internet cafe, we had computers that could play it, right? So we had like, I think the first video card was like just the first voodoo card, and so we had a computer that could play it. And I think he ended up getting stuck doing some college stuff and didn't have time to play anymore. So I kind of took over his account, and then my this then they were asking about guides. Like there was a post that went out. I think it was actually from Michelle Butler and Jeff when they had just gotten to San Diego to help with the customer service program and the guide program. And I saw a message, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, I'll give it a try. It's not a big deal. It's something different to do. And I got the job for the free customer service, right? Um, and then I think after like beta 4, uh, my GM, I don't remember her name. Trying to think now, but she's like, hey, do you want to become a GM? And I'm like, yeah, that'd be cool. Didn't really think anything of it. And then a week later, Michelle Butler, like one of those cold calls where you're just sitting there one day and you get a phone call and it's Michelle Butler on the line going, hey Todd, we heard you're interested in becoming a GM. Would you like to do an interview? And I'm like, sure. And I think she asked me like 3 or 4 questions. It was like a 15-minute interview. And she's like, well, if you want the job, just come out to San Diego. I'm like, how do I do that?
How old were you at the time?
I was 23, so it wasn't like a big deal from that standpoint. Um, my current job, I don't remember what I was doing. It's probably like computer repair or something like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I basically at that point just told my parents, I'm like, hey, I'm moving to California. Went and then just drove out to California like in 2 weeks
Yeah.
for that $9 an hour a job and sleeping on the floor of someone's apartment.
Do you remember whose apartment? She's not in chat at the moment, is she? Bonita just
No,
arrived. Okay.
no, this was up in Escondido, so it was with I see Bonita in chat. She might remember. Um, who was that? It was the keymaster and his girlfriend.
Oh my god.
What was his name?
When you say that, I'm just like, it's almost there. Like it just started to. When you said you had the GM that you worked for was a her. It wasn't Lydia by any chance. Satosha.
No, no, no. No. I stayed with Lynn and
Ah,
Dave in Escondido after that. That's when
okay.
we actually rented a house with Steve. Uh, Fisnick? No, what was his name?
Not Minnick.
Steve Fuller. So
Yes. Minnick. No.
Minnick.
Yeah, Minnick.
Minnick.
Steve Fuller.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was like a halfling rogue or something like that. He was always causing mischief. That was like his GM thing, was to cause mischief. Um, but no, before that I stayed with a group of kids that were just, there was like 5 of us crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment, people sleeping on the couch, I was sleeping on the floor. Like we were there for a few months before we, trying to get settled before we actually were able to get like a house to rent.
Okay. Yeah, because I remember like when I got there, there were a number of the camps. So there was like
Different
Esther's
people living
camp and
everywhere.
Eugene and Tom and Jeremy and those guys and with Brian and yeah, so it's there were the camps. I felt kind of privileged to have my 20 square foot sort of sketchy apartment in North Park, to be honest. So, okay, you got there. You're a
Uh,
GM now.
so I was also there when like the whole technical disasters of some of the servers happened. So basically, if you can imagine, our server room was actually right below us. We were in the Scranton data center. I think it's, if for those of you around San Diego, it's where the Carl Strauss is in the Scranton Business Park. And so our server room was basically, we didn't have computer racks. Like, so one of the things I had to do was help the IT guy with like replacing hard drives, because we would lose zone boxes all the time. So I had some IT background, so I helped with that. I also joined the apprentice program back then, so I worked with like Tony and Zakins and Roger and Clover and all those guys. It was really fun. And one of the first tasks I had was to start finishing the monk quests from Kinos. Actually, from Kinos in Freeport, because I think they only went to like, I don't know, like the yellow headband. So that was like my first design apprentice test.
Mm.
Was that?
So before we go too much further, on the GM topic, we already had our first question roll in. Thank you, Bunny.
Mm-hmm.
Vulork asked, what was it like governing those politics before spawn time variants on Vision?
It was, one of the things I remember was that, so for the GMs for our work schedule was like 11 a.m. to like 10 p.m. or it was like covering a lot of the PST time. The problem at that point is by the time I get in my queue of complaints, because various guilds had were not following a schedule, or doing something like that was pretty high. So there wasn't a like guilds like before there was everyone gets to get their loot or their spawn, there was some unofficial schedule, obviously nothing blessed by us, but trying to help played negotiator or mediator between those guilds was always interesting. It was just, you know, back then it was just a lot of complaining. And I apologize if you can hear screaming kids. They're running around downstairs somewhere.
Oh, don't apologize at all. It's been a really cool theme on the show, to be honest. It's like everybody's got kids, and I know with everybody being like stuck at home and all that, they're going to be there. So yeah, and it's funny because like the complaints would never just come in like one at a time, right? It was never like one person complaining for the guild. It was 70 people complaining for the guild.
Well, that was, you know, those are some of the rules you set up as a GM. It's like, you know, the first time that happened, you're like, okay, you know, if you want your complaint to be heard, only an officer or the guild leader can send a complaint. And so if they didn't, you know, that wasn't followed, I just delete all the complaints and there would be nothing. So unfortunately, I felt like I ruled with an iron fist sometimes. Like there was cases where people were just not listening and I had to just, you know, pull them into Flame of Pier and sit them on top of the hourglass and be like, look, you're stuck here, especially for the non-caster types. Or if the caster type, I just bind them there and be like, until you guys can work things out between the guilds, you're stuck here. And it seemed kind of ruthless, but there was no, I mean, otherwise it was just Plane of Fear training, Plane of Hate training each other all day long.
Right on. So your description there is very much like in line with my image of you, Todd. That seems like I didn't know you as a GM really, but that's if I imagine you as a GM, that seems in line. And so cool. So you were in the apprentice program, did the monk stuff, and then essentially at some point you're working way onto the team or got pulled onto the team.
Yeah. So that was like the first work I did, and then we actually put an apprentice program together. And I'm gonna apologize in advance for this, but we did Plane of Air, or sorry, it's like not Sky Plane, but you know, the first original Plane of Air. We finished populating that and making that the new raid zone. It was okay. There was a lot of I wasn't like the sole contributor. There was a number of us that contributed to that. Then after that, basically, is when we had the transition to Sony Pictures briefly, and then Sony Online Entertainment from Variant. And from there, I was doing design content for Kunark. And to this day, I don't really remember what I was doing. I remember doing a lot of stuff in Fear NOV, but on that, I don't remember much. Someone's going to have to like jog my memory.
There are definitely people that can do that. Cool. And so I've always known you primarily as a programmer or engineer, whatever the hell you guys want to be called these days.
Yeah. So during Kunark, I think, again, we were all doubled up in cubes type thing. I think Lawrence was in my cube with me. I know his name's come up a couple of times, and I remember having to deal with the spit cup next to my keyboard. Man, what was I working on? I honestly don't remember. I think there was some stuff I did with designing the visualizations for the Warrior Epic. So like the particle blades, that was something that no one was like playing with at the time. It's like, how do we basically took what was Brad's fiery sword, and we tried to change how the particle effects work, create the Warrior Epics. I know I did some content, but nothing like, none of the major dungeons or anything like that I can remember. And from a coding perspective, it was mostly probably just adding stuff for ability, like spell effects or item effects or something like that. Pretty simple.
Right on. So one of the questions that came up, and thank you, Bunny, for posting those for me, was Nobby Knobs had asked, did you make any epic quests? And so it sounds like on a technical side, at least.
I did do one epic quest. Like I said, you remember how things were kind of just doled out, like who wants to work on this? I actually did the Enchanter epic. So I was more of a casual player. I didn't do any hardcore raiding. So I wanted to create something that was, I don't know. At the time, it was more about making something accessible. But it was like all just discovery, right? So the only way you could complete the quest is like a big like treasure hunt type thing. You follow the clues that were very, you know, you know how it is. Like because we knew everything would be completed by a community in a very short period of time. So we knew they were going to collaborate. So then you can throw 1,000 bodies at a problem, no matter how good the riddle is, someone's going to solve it pretty quickly.
Do you,
So you know, it's I don't know. Is it easy now? I don't know. Like
don't
I was a cleric.
don't listen to chat. Don't listen to chat. They, as soon as they heard I did Beast Sword Epic, it was like, oh my god, that was the easiest epic quest. Now it's
I was a cleric, and I worked with my guild to get that epic, and I felt horrible that I put my guild through the fact of getting that epic because for 3 days, I think it was like 3 to 5 days straight, sat in um, freaking Skyfire and just waited and waited and waited. And then when the spawn, because the spawn was variable between 3 to 5 days, and it went past the 3 day mark and it went past the 4 day mark, you're like, oh my god, when I took that 1 hour nap, did someone like kill steal it or something like that?
right.
The whole process over again.
Do you know offhand who worked on the Rogue Epic?
Yeah, that was Kaposi.
Okay.
Because he was came from Safe House, right?
Did he? Oh my god! When you say that, it sounds so familiar now.
Yeah, his GM name was Kendrick. Like I think if you search that, you should be able to find that. Like he was, and so I mean, take for granted what epics are supposed to be, but I think you know, I remember some discussions about difficulty with epics, and I seem to remember a conversation with him on it's stupid that these are so hard, and kind of made it easy.
Word. Yeah, it's funny. I've reached out to him this week. I have limited, like I use LinkedIn and stuff to try to get a hold of people. So if I don't hear back from him, I may have to tap into some other folks and see if somebody's got a handle on John. But there are a lot of questions that have come up in here that I think John, and maybe only John, would be able to answer related to his work. Let's see. So going back through the question list, I think we covered the rogue, the epic question. Nick has been, he just asked here, but I know we've been talking about this one in preparation for this. So Nick asks, can you talk a little bit about the development of Project M? What was the vision of the experiment? And did you have other ideas in mind for it? I know I believe we're jumping ahead timeline wise, but we'll get back to the timeline.
Sure. Yeah, that's jumping to Loveland development. I don't remember how the original conversation came up. So Steve Clover, one of the original developers of EverQuest, programmer, was right outside my cube. By this time, we had moved to a different part of the building, and man, I don't remember. I think this really kind of stems from GM events, right? So GM events, you have the ability to become an NPC, right? So you would control the NPC, and this is how a lot of GM events would work. And so I think from that we thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if we had an alternate advantage? I mean, this was meant to be player progression, where you could level up specific NPCs through the normal environment, and you would unlock like level tiers. So basically, you would start in Kinos and you would spawn as a rat, and then if you got the rat to like level 4 or 5, then you would progress to the next Chiquino Hills, where you could be a wolf. And then if you manage to get the wolf to a couple more levels, then you can proceed to the next tier. And it kind of worked like that. I think what we ended up doing was it was ended up being based on your level, unlocked like tiers of monsters. And I remember one of the ones that I did just for the fun of it was I became a madman in I think South Row, and I was a wizard, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be fun. And the first thing I do is I run over to where the crocs are, and I see a druid, and I root him. He dies. And I'm like, uh-oh, this is gonna cause problems. And so I think at some point we had to start restricting what you could spawn as, because as a caster, you would have unlimited mana, right? So the mana, you actually became the NPC, so you had all his abilities and stats. And anyone who's played knows that NPCs have like an insane amount of mana. And so you could just sit there as a monster NPC and just cast forever.
I'm going to turn you up slightly per request in chat. We'll see if this is good. Chat will let us know as we go. I'm hearing you pretty good, but can definitely be a little bit louder. Yeah, it's funny. As soon as you said that, I remembered as a GM, yeah, we'd make a new character of the appropriate class of the monster that we're going to be, and then we just did that little. I think it was really just like a transform.
Yeah, it was like become NPC or something like that.
Yeah, but yeah, the concept for Project M was super cool, and it seemed like it was just a spare time sort of passion project at the time.
Yeah, I don't know how we were allowed to work on it, considering what was going on at Buckland at the time in terms of the amount of work. But I think we caught the eye of, Smed and Jeff and Brad, and even Bill at the time, Bill Trost, and they're like, "Oh, this is amazing! This is like, no one's ever done this before," and it was definitely something that was unique to EverQuest, and it felt like more of a role-playing, D&D style feature.
Yeah. In the way I remember it, though, it was like, I know there was a ton going on, more than should have been going on, really. Like, it was a crazy process, but I got the sense, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I got the sense that it was kind of like, hey, with all the effort going into all this shit trying to get it done, we need, or let me do this differently. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you need to let me do this thing that's fun every once in a while, just so I can decompress and not murder everybody.
Yeah, and I think we had gotten like a proof of concept done pretty quickly, in our spare time.
Yeah.
And so that allowed us to like actually spend work time on it.
And what about gyms? Because I couldn't remember if that was you or Steve, or you and Steve, or somebody else.
What was it?
Gyms?
Oh, I totally forgot about that. That was totally Steve Clover. That was 100% him. Is that still in game?
I don't think so. Is it?
Type it. Yeah, see if it's still in game.
Oh my god. It's still in game.
I had totally forgotten about that. Now you can just play this on stream all day.
Yeah. All right. So forget Stream Raiders. I'll just sit and play gyms. All right. Done. Otherwise I'll be too distracted. We'll all be distracted. I didn't even try it. That's crazy I didn't try it. All right. So there it is.
Yeah. So Steve did that in his spare time. That was, like you said, that whole not going insane type thing. That was probably why he did that.
Yeah. How big was... So do you remember how big the team was during that period?
Luckland or Kunark?
You know what? Let's go back to Kunark because we did jump ahead. So let's work chronologically so our memories will work.
Okay. So for Kunark, that's when I actually became an engineer from designer, and I can still visualize that entire office. I know where pretty much everyone sat. There was probably only like 30 of us, maybe 25, maybe less. Like there was only a few of us that were doubled up in cubes, and the artists were sitting in the middle of the office space. Obviously, the engineers, and there's like Steve and Roger and Brian Hook, and then the producer types. Yeah, and like 25 people max. And we had also just brought on, I think, Roy at that time for redoing the UI. So that was in progress at that time, I think. So.
Yeah, so I'm just making a quick note because some of this stuff as it comes up, I mean, I'll have it in the video, but still, why not write it down? It's like, oh yeah, that's right. Those people were involved and gives me some more potential leads. Let's see. Guys, I'm not ignoring your questions. I've got them right here as they're being passed on. What I'm going to try to do is plug them in as we work through the chronology and see if that'll work. And no worries, Nick. Don't apologize for asking a good question. All right, so you came in. So that was going into Velius, basically.
Yeah, I keep forgetting there's a jump between Kunark and Luckling. Actually, when we talk about Velius, I think there's a memory gap there, and I'm not really sure why. I know there's one thing I worked on in Velius, but for Kunark, just going back to that, one of the things we had to deal with is the initial design for EQ2 coming up. So, like other people had mentioned, no one considered this game going beyond the original title. And so when Kunark development was being done, that was it. We were done. That was going to be the last expansion, was Kunark. And that's why you see such a power gap between the old world and Kunark, because we were basically told, just make it fun. Like, make everyone feel powerful. There was really no guidance. Like, what was created for items was just insane. I mean, if you just look at the armor sets from the original EQ. Now I don't know now power gap. I don't think it's that great because of all the additional features that have been added to the original game. But back then it was huge.
And so, and you're probably seeing some of these rolled in as well. There was a question as we kind of move into the Luckland or the Velius era and then eventually Luckland. Back on Plane of Sky, Frank the Bank asked, what was the discussion like for Plane of Sky to use Death Touch so liberally? Do you remember?
Don't remember. I want to say that it was a way of forcing a certain DPS amount. So we didn't have any timers back in the day, right? There was no scripting. There was no timers. There was no, like, you wanted to make the fight doable, but at the same time, you didn't want it to be like an instant res fest. Like you could just battle res everyone or whatever was, I forget what was doable at the time. And so the death touches were possibly a way of just restricting the fight. Like you have to beat them before this time period. I don't remember the specifics though, because I really didn't do big fights there. I think I was just mainly working on the item collection for turn-in stuff. Like I have this. So this is my original binder.
Ooh.
From when I was a GM. And it has even like one of the things we used to do is actually the first page on here is like the Plane of Sky item chart on how every item maps to every quest. And it's got work, you know, I have all the classes on here with what island dropped what component and what rarity. And so that was like one of the things we designed. And this is back also when we had to print out, you know, the item in spell databases, because as GMs, we weren't given privilege to any of those tools. So we had to like ask for a weekly printout of everything so that if we needed to reimburse an item, we actually had the item numbers to it.
Dude, I forgot about that. Because that was around like when I got there. That was still like trying to get that info was crazy.
Yeah, and there's also something else in that binder. So one of the things we had to do is, if we were going to suspend or discipline someone, we actually had to write them up, essentially. You know, their character name, their account, what their offense was, get it signed off by our leads. I have every record of every disciplinary action I've taken against a player still in that binder.
So you see the offers in chat to buy the binder already, right?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of history in that binder.
Museum piece. We'll at some point we'll have to actually pull this together for the EQ museum. All right. So, and as I look at the questions come in and start thinking of flow of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let them pile up a bit, and then we're going to hit them at different intervals. But I think it'll be fun to let you just keep flowing down memory lane.
Sure. It's also like how I can remember stuff, like the black holes in my memory of what was happening at that time is like they're huge. But every time someone mentions something, it jogs a little bit of the memory and stuff starts coming back. So this is cool.
Yeah, it's been that way since I started, for me, for sure. And it's like everybody we talk to and everybody that comes in chat and asks questions, that like a little bit of the memory starts to come back more and more. It's actually pretty crazy. All right, so the gap in terms of Velius, you don't remember why, or?
So the gap between original and Kunark was because this was it. We were done with the game.
Oh no, your memory gap. The power gap makes perfect sense. Yeah.
The only thing I really remember, I remember Velius mainly because I played that expansion a lot. And I did do content in Velius. I did all the design work and itemization for Crystal Caverns. And so, because I was an engineer now at that time, I still loved the design. So, as an engineer, I was given like one zone, where the designers had like 2 or 3 zones, or major stuff. So I did Crystal Caverns with James Romney, if you remember him.
I do now, yeah.
And so we spent a lot of time tweaking, just little things like just the ambience of the zone with the lighting. How many, like we were restricted to only like 16 lights, or it was maybe even 8 lights in the zone. So what we could do to make it like visually appealing was very difficult. We had to place each light at a specific coordinate in order for it to not overwrite a nearby crystal light. I think that's all changed because there's probably not any restrictions on that now from an engine standpoint. And I think I might have done some work with just coding up some of the Beast Lord stuff, or sorry, Velius, the scripting stuff. But yeah, I don't remember doing much else in there. I was probably just working on back end features.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And then Lachlan, it seems like your memory's maybe a little, like Lachlan stands out a little bit more.
Lachlan is definitely stands out a lot more, and it's also because that's when a lot of you guys came into it pretty heavily, and also watching all the other VODs, it's triggered a whole bunch of the memories. So if we get someone like Tom Wells, or some of the original designers during the Kunark and Velius to come in, they probably have jog some more memories.
Right on. Yeah, and there are a couple people, like even getting Steve in, Steve Burke, the work that he was doing then, because I know he's collaborating with those guys pretty heavily. And he was sort of my go-to. I went to Steve, and Steve went to the team during that era because I was like, as an apprentice, he was an apprentice, and I was his unofficial apprentice in a sense. Let's see. All right. So before we go into Lachlan, let me hit a couple of these, and that way they don't backlog too much. We cover that. Retro Gamer asked, nope, we already covered a Rogue Epic. Cascrack asked, why wasn't the VP no gate, no CR thing applied to other dungeons? Do you know?
No clue.
Fair enough. Sometimes that is going to be the answer, dude. For me, I do that a lot. Looking ahead, Retro Gamer 5000 asked, did you have any involvement in Eldon dungeons?
Yeah. But at that time I was 100% into programming, engineering at that point. So looking at the feature set, I probably worked on some of that stuff. I don't remember when the raid UI came out, but I know I helped with that and like some of the guild features, the instancing. We were also doing a lot of just back-end server support to keep the game running and expanding. We had some technical growth issues. The servers could only handle so many people, but you wanted them to handle more because as the expansions got bigger and bigger, people got more and more spread out. So you didn't want to make the world feel empty. So you wanted to enable that player cap to get much higher.
Right. Next question on the list, also from Retro, was, do you know who remade Freeport?
No, I had left Sony briefly, obviously, to go work on Vanguard, and I think the revamps happened after that. Okay. Like the individual zone revamps. I mean, we had the new terrain editor and engine stuff done, because you saw that in starting you see that in Luckland and then the following expansions. I'm not sure when the decision was to go through and revamp zones. My personal opinion on that is I wish that was never done. Like it's really hard to find a revamped zone that I'm like, oh, this is way better. And I know a lot of effort has gone into it from the direction. Like I do not fault at all any of the artists or designers or anyone who's worked on that. But given the tool set, it would have been difficult to really create that nostalgia or kept that vision of what the original zone looked like and felt for the people who had been playing since day one.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I appreciate the balance on that one. It's a candid answer with a nice follow up, because that's the way I feel basically. It's the same.
Well, you heard like when I first joined Aerodune, I rolled a halfling druid, and I'm in Rivervale. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome! Love the music. And I pop out the zone line into Misty, and I'm like, what happened? Like, where's Misty Thicket? It's gone. So that was my initial reaction. I'm like, ah. But now that I played through it for 12 levels, it was like, okay, I get it. But I still miss my Misty Thicket.
Yeah. Nostalgia, man. It's a hell of a drug. So the next question, and I'm gonna go through these, and then we'll get back on just sort of the memory lane tip. Frank the Bank asked, what was the discussion like? Nope, we've already covered that one. I jumped ahead. That was the Death Touch one. All right. Retro Gamer asked him if he was happy with the design for the bazaar.
Oh, okay. That's my fault. So for Luckland, one of the things I also worked on was Shadowhaven. Again, that was me and Mr. Romedy working on Shadowhaven, and that zone, like I had no idea, like it was so big. And it was supposed to, it was meant to be the neutral city that everyone landed in, and somehow that all worked and got along. Holy crap, was that hard to populate and deal with. But alongside that was the Nexus and the Bazaar. So those were like the three introductory zones that everyone landed in initially. The Bazaar's point, one of the things we were talking about, EverQuest numbers, and how Planes of Power was like where we hit the peak. Well, Luckland, we knew where it was going. We knew it was going up. And the East Commons thing the tunnel just wasn't working. So just like, we're like, okay, well, what if we made players their own vendors, right? And so the concept of, well, if you buy, so I actually did I think I pretty much did like 95% of the engineering for the Bazaar feature. I wanted to make it an auction house. But everyone felt like that would just be too impersonal, going from East Common lands, everyone's chatting, spamming, to silence. So they wanted to keep that concept. Maybe it was me who wanted to keep that concept. I honestly don't remember. And so, you went and bought your bag, you put your crap in it, you listed all the prices, and you put it up, and then you just left your computer running all night. And it was amazing because our concurrency shot up, right? And so what ended up happening was, and then everyone's like, well, now I need a second account to just be an auction house person. And so everyone bought second accounts or third accounts. And it just kept going up at that point. And that's what started that whole, like that skyrocket of, and I guess it was good.
Yeah. It definitely, depending on who you asked as well, right? The people that were looking strictly at those metrics, I'm sure, were extremely happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's see. There's a comment about Pollutal Caverns. I could have sworn Pollutal wasn't that Coil? Maybe.
Yeah, I don't remember really helping that out at all. That zone still drives me crazy because it's like 2 areas, I think, like 2 pathways.
Yeah. So, and I only remember that because I could have sworn I remember him on launch day, me being next to him for some reason, or maybe he came over to the CS pit and was like, hey, are there any players in this zone? I was like, some people are walking around, but they're wondering where the mobs are. And he's like, well, they're about to see as soon as I bounce the zone. And like the expansion was live and he like bounced the zone and all of a sudden it's populated. So
Yeah, there was so in the development process when you were working on a zone, um, you had to export the data to essentially flat file, to text files, right? It was just all delimited text files. And now that you remember that, there were some cases where we actually forgot to publish the data to live because we were all testing it, and probably QA was testing it, and everything was fine. Just forgot the step of, we didn't have a release manager. Now I think about it, there was no way to guarantee that work you did actually made it to live. I don't even remember how that happened. It was probably literally just someone copying files from one place to another. So yeah, it was very likely that we just forgot to publish data, and it didn't go live until someone called us out, or we made another fix in that zone, and then you pushed it out, and everyone's like, "Whoa, everything changed." We're like, "No, it didn't."
or to Turnip's point, and I'll jump ahead and get right on that, of was there any version control, you would also find out that you broke something when you broke something and then that zone got pushed and you didn't realize your elbow hit the keyboard and all of a sudden something stopped working.
So there was no version control on the databases. There probably weren't even backups, as far as I know. Yeah, and so if you're in, we just use like the access, Microsoft Access forms to access the database. And like you said, if you just fell asleep at the keyboard one day and did a face plant, you were changing content.
It happened at least once. It wasn't me, but I remember it happening.
And the thing is that in order for the data to save, all you had to do was click off the field, right? So as long as the cursor was on that field, it didn't save. But as soon as you clicked off, it saved. So if you were working on something, you went to lunch, you forgot about what you were working on, clicked off, boom, saved. And I think like at some point for not version control, but just to kind of get an idea of what was changed, we did start diffing files to do line by line comparisons of what actually changed. But that probably came pretty late.
Fairly late, I would have to think. I just remember I had an incredible, like, learning the database was the same as learning how to use a heavy machine gun when I was in the army, right? Like, it's once you get used to it, it's good. You just have to respect the fact that it can destroy everything. So like, don't screw around, don't screw up. And yeah, it was a bit terrifying when you're new.
And there was no, if there's anyone who's familiar with databases and how they work, there was no foreign key constraints on data. So what can happen is that while you're populating item tables, you could accidentally type in a random number that has no meaning, and nothing would happen, right? So the item would just not spawn or drop on the loot tables. The problem is that 2 years later, someone creates an item of that ID, and now there's random, and that ID has always existed on item tables, but it just never spawned because it didn't exist. And now all suddenly it exists. And so we actually had a case, I think, where Benita might remember this. Somewhere in one of the newbie zones, it was dropping like, raid level gear. Can't remember. I think it might have been like rune bolstered belts were being dropped by like rats or something like that in Kinos. You know, thank God like someone petitioned right away, because we were able to basically like we can do a /permakill on an NPC. I don't remember that, which would essentially just It
No
would essentially
spawning.
have data NPC record from the from the live server memory, so that we could stop them spawning and then push out the fix. But I think that happened multiple times over the course of development.
Yeah, it happened a few times. Because if it wasn't that instance, I remember an instance at least while I was in CS or in house. All right, so looking at some of the questions, knock out some of these, get caught back up a little bit. Major Road Rage asks, looking back, what would you have changed about Crystal Cavern that seemed like a good idea at the time?
I wanted to add more lore to the Coldanes that were in Crystal Caverns. I wanted to continue to expand their quest lines, their essentially their culture, right? So they were the underground version of the Coldane. I don't remember if they had a specific name to them, but I kind of like the idea of how you talked about as designers you kind of get to organically grow a concept, and that was the one. If I had infinite time, would continually grow that concept of those Coldane. What are they called? The ice Coldane? I don't remember. Someone has to remember what they were called.
Somebody's got to know that name, or they're Googling right now. Why them, though?
Just because that was my little piece of Velius.
Yeah, but like, what is it about these dudes? Like, was it a thing that you always wanted to do, or did it just sort of, as it happened, you kind of fell in love with them and imagined a world?
Well, and if you get Bill Coyle on, he'll know. Like this is one of those tidbits of an expansion where you're given just like the cliff notes of, hey, these guys exist. Here's some basic lore behind them. Run with it. And so these guys had a weird backstory that I don't remember, but I must have liked it. So that's where I wanted to kind of just keep growing that. And I had to compete with Steve on all his Colding quests and stuff like that. So there was a little bit of competition there on providing good content.
No, sir. Steve would he would not sleep for 5 days and put another 400 invisible men in that zone, and you would lose that competition, buddy. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, and one of the other things with Crystal Caves, again, trying to provide a more accessible experience to some people that was fun. My initial item population, I did a lot of research on what item gaps I wanted to fill, and I had some broke ass items in there. And the reason why, and they were, like the robe, I think that gets dropped down there was just meant to be a few stats better or different than like shiny metallic robe. But the problem is that, or whatever, everyone came in there. Like it was supposed to be a level 25 to 35 dungeon, but level 50s, 60s, everyone were going in there just to farm this robe because I don't remember what stat it had on. They're like, oh, we've never had a robe with that stat on it, so we have to go to this dungeon to get this robe. And I'm like, oh crap. So that robe got nerfed like 3 times before launch, and some of the items got nerfed like multiple times before launch because people would come up to me and be like, dude, you can't put that item in there. I'm like, why? It's not that powerful. It just filled a huge hole, and the hole was enough to make it desirable by every player.
It's always a scary moment when your content is too loved too immediately. It's like, wait a second, why do they like this so much? What did I do wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's and Zaid's kind of called it out. They were meant to be accessible, right? The whole dungeon was meant to be accessible by a small group. And so that's why it was so popular. It was kind of annoying to get to. That was the only thing. I remember trying to get there as a low level and running to that crap that was at the gate or at the clicky to get in there.
I'm actually, it's one of those zones that I know I had to have spent time in with my guild, but I've drawn a blank. So I'm looking forward to when Velius hits on TLP.
You would have never gone there with your. I mean, it's you would have gone there with like 2 people, 3 people, like one partial healer and one other person was really all you needed to go down there with. Most of it was soloable. You could drop straight to the bottom, right? So it was this big winding zigzag. You could drop straight to the bottom and then go to the city, and then the back part had some really annoying stuff. But yeah, everyone went there to camp the queen. And the other thing is it spawned all the time. That was the other difference, I think. And you didn't need to camp it for hours. I think you could just go down there for like half hour, and you're going to get the rare spawn, or she's going to spawn, and then oh yeah,
So,
were there geoids down there? I totally forget.
farming gems, and there was at least one other farmed crystalline silk there forever.
Yeah.
Now be mentioned. Yeah. So, do you remember who made Tower of Frozen Shadow? Major Road Rage asked and added on, that zone was the single best, worst, and most frustrating zone I played in post-Velius release.
For whatever reason, I don't think it was made by like one person. Something sticks in my mind that this was one of those zones where a number of people contributed to, like, and maybe even like apprentices contributed to.
Jason. I could have sworn someone. Yeah, I could have sworn maybe Bill mentioned Jason. Was that one of those zones that was assigned to somebody who then had like multiple hats to wear, so they couldn't commit to it full time?
So where I was kind of going with is that the multiple people would be because of that, because I think also Jason was not leading up the apprentice program, but had like his minions, and I think that's where like, and even like Cavern and Lydia and whoever else could just contribute like cycles to development were contributing to that. But I could be completely wrong. I could. What I've been doing during the previous streams is I pull up the credits for each expansion to kind of give my mind a refresher of who was working on that expansion at the time.
Smart move. So let's see, next question. Nils asked, is this why there are so many unitemized named mobs in Eastern Karanas? Someone forgot to copy a file. So it's referencing, yeah. No, I don't think that's it. It would have eventually, in the last 21 years, been copied, I think.
I mean, this goes back to when I joined Variant and EverQuest at the time. There was just so much unfinished content, and so that's why I was working on the monk headbands and sashes, is because I played a monk at some point, and I'm like, hey, this just ended. And as a GM, players don't know the content isn't finished. So when they hit a blocker, they just petition. And you're like, every day it was like, hey, I can't get my orange sash or red sash or whatever. And you're like, well, yeah, it doesn't exist. Sorry. So that's where I felt compelled from a wanting to help the player standpoint of working on that content. But that was just one piece of it. I mean, there was so much content that just had such huge gaps, and a lot of that content was only in people's minds, like Bill and Tony Garcia and all those guys. That was just all in their heads. It was never really put down on paper, so we had no guidelines. We just have to go talk to them. It's like, hey, so I noticed this thing wasn't finished, or there's this group of bandits that have names. Like, what the hell are they for? Like, are they supposed to be like some known family? And then they would tell you the story, and you're like, oh crap, that's awesome. Perhaps we should write that down so someone could eventually fix it. But we never did.
Yep. Yeah, and a few of us ran into that as well. It was exactly as you explained. It was as either a player or a GM. I've heard about this and heard about this, and it's not finished. Let me hop on it. And I remember Ryan, if you're still in chat, I know we had those discussions. Paul was that way about stuff. So yeah. Just real quick housekeeping before I forget and feel bad. Cat's Twitch, Bufu, Ebdane, and Colonel Tosh. Thank you for the follows. Welcome. I hope you're having a fun time here. Niente asked, what was your favorite and least favorite system to work on in EQ code?
The spell system was the worst. But Scott started fixing that, and I was actually surprised he didn't talk about that more in his VOD, but he began fixing the spell system, like pulling apart. I think at one point, you know, the function was called do spell, and that was it. Every spell ability was in one function in code, and it was something like 15,000 lines of just spell code. And yeah, and so I remember Scott kind of going, "Oh God, how are we going to add, you know, new abilities? Like especially when you start talking about, you know, AA, which I worked a lot on, and you're basically sticking more if checks inside spaghetti code that was just a mess, and you're like, this is only going to get worse." And so Ryan mentioned, yeah, Krause did work on that a ton also. I feel so sorry for those guys because it was just it was just a mess. But I mean, you know, it was all like that. Do attack, again, another function. You call one function, and NPCs, PCs, and everything went through one function in code.
There was a follow-up that tagged right into that, and I'm curious if I missed it here. Were procs also in the do spell code?
Why do I think procs came pretty like late? I don't remember. I mean, that part I don't remember, but literally it was probably just, you know, an if check. Oh, great, now do spell, right? So it was like, you know, the worst of worst. Like
Oh, great.
you're in this giant combat loop, and then you're like, well, let's just jump into the spell loop. What could go wrong?
Yeah, because Bunny mentions it here. Ryan, you may know better, but I could have sworn essentially it was just like it was a trigger that then went back into the spell code, right? I mean, it was a trigger on the item, a percentage. Okay, so Zaid, your question, was it already answered with regards to any insight into why East Karana named or unitemized? I think we covered that one. In response to the other one. Cool. All right. Retro asked, did you have to deal with plat sellers, real world traders in Bazaar?
Oh, I have a story for you about that. So plat. So this is still, let's see here. This would have been end of Luckland, maybe Legacy Akeisha time. Plat duping or just item duping in general was still a huge, huge issue. And I think, you know, plat sellers in general. And, you know, the company didn't want to have anything to do with that. That was anti EverQuest. You know, everything about what EverQuest stood for was being wrecked by, you know, plat sellers. And sorry, my mechanical keyboard is super loud. So basically, we had to come up with a plan of trying to fix the economy, and because you know, just prices were skyrocketing. We didn't know why. We knew there wasn't that much plat coming into the world. And so we made a concerted effort to track down dupes. And it was, people who got pretty bold with duping. And they didn't care anymore. They were just like, whatever, if they ban this account, I'll just create a new one and start duping. And so at one point, I wrote a little log parser. I mean, we logged everything back in the day, which was actually pretty handy. I wrote a little log parser that acted as just like a little spider program that would track back the source of platinum to the original owner. And so if you traded anything, we could track it back to whoever first got that item. And we kept running this scenario where this plat just kept magically appearing on these characters. And we're like, what the hell? So then we started cross-referencing all their accounts, like where they were coming from, just everything, IPs, banking information, whatever. And we just suspended a swath of accounts. And then, because we knew they were all shady. We got some legitimate accounts caught up in it, but most of it was just people not knowing they were buying stuff from people who had duped stuff, so they kind of got caught up in that. And at one point, we calculated the amount of plat we took out of the economy, and based on RMT at the time, it was something like 3 million USD worth of plat we had just suspended on people's accounts in one day. Holy crap, the shitstorm from that. Probably shouldn't go into the details too much, but our lawyers got called. I got called into offices going, what the hell did you just do? And I'm like, luckily our lawyers were the best because they played EverQuest. They played EverQuest. They were in top guilds. The reason why everyone worked at Sony was because they were part of the game. So $3 million back in the day was huge. And I'm like, nope. I had one of my binders, just like the one I had here. In fact, there might be some stuff in there on that. And I just dropped the binder on the desk, and I'm like, here's the reason why we suspended or banned every one of these accounts, and here's how much plat was on it. And Larry goes, thanks. And that was it. And yeah, that was the end of that story. They never got their accounts back. But it was our fault as developers that we got into that state. So we did definitely make a concerted effort of cleaning up all the cases where you could dupe. Most of it all had to do with like trading and then going link dead, or like some version of like zoning, going link dead, trading, whatever would not save it would revert your character back to a previous state.
Yep. And I'm pretty sure I remember that period as well. Like that was a significant topic of discussion, I guess is a good way to say it. So tell you what, you need a quick break, but we're going to keep trucking on, it sounds like.
Yep. I'm just going to step away. You guys can look at all the stuff in the background, and I'll be right back.
Cool, man. No worries. While he does that, I'm going to go open my window again because it got warm in here. Be right back. Uh-huh. All right. So let me know if the background noise, the street noise gets too loud. It can be loud at times. Zenthal, Major Road Rage, Mojito, Bromigo, and Brandon Emo? Brandon Emo. Thank you very much for the follows, guys. Thanks for being here. Tupac Shakur, thank you for being here. I knew you weren't dead. How's Cuba, by the way? Major Road Rage, thank you for the subscription. I really appreciate it. Cool. All right. So I warned folks, if the background noise gets a little too crazy, I'll get up and I'll take care of that. But we'll see how it goes. Super Shug, thank you for the follow. Okay, so now that that break is over, we had a nice sort of closing on the last topic. I'm going to get back into some questions, and then I've got the feeling we're going to keep going through questions. We're probably you're going to have to come on another time for sure. There's so much, dude. You're there 19 years, and we're only a few years in. So
Buckland right now.
Yeah. And I don't feel like we've gone deep in Luckland. We've hit some points, but Luckland was a special time. So Retro asked another question: what was the idea behind Plane of Nature Ruins faction with action? Factions with action and being a raid zone was that a good idea? Thinking back, I don't. Do you understand the question? I think it's either my reading of it or.
Send it to me in Discord. Is it like? I'm not sure.
Plane of Growth faction ruining. Plane of Growth ruining faction with elves. Okay.
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, you kind of have to think about the intent of. I mean, yeah, it's a raid zone, but you can run around there and not be aggro to anything. And there was quests in there, I think, too. It was Tunari, so the idea that if you really, really wanted the items, yeah, you could get them, but at a cost. That was kind of like those decisions that a gamer had to make was, do I care? And we were still trying to keep people engaged in the world, like in the sense that they felt like they were part of that world, and the decisions they made had impact to some extent. I don't know. Was it a good idea? I don't know. I didn't have any like decision on that at that point.
So, and I would say the whole, and why not keep it consistent and all that stuff during Planes, especially, like, and even before that, I know there was a lot of back and forth. I think we maybe simplified it a bit with Planes, with the whole plot line of, oh, the gods realize what assholes you are. So,
And it was a challenge, right? It wasn't, you defeated the gods, you didn't really kill them, right? So the idea was that the gods are like, all right, you challenge us, let's do it. It's from that standpoint. It wasn't like you're actually soiling their world or their plane or whatever. They didn't care that you were there.
Yeah. We'll let you guys figure out the Tunare. Honestly, I think I say it different every other time I say it, so have fun with that.
Either way could go. I think either way is fine.
It's like aunt and auntie. It just depends on who I'm hanging out with. Do you remember who designed the Spirit of Garzakor quest in Velius?
It doesn't ring a bell. Like, I'm not even sure what that is. Was that like those those hoof guys.
I
Like
don't know.
the two-legged, what, Minotaur dudes? Was that what that was? Tismax? Was it?
Tismax.
I thought Tismax were the other guys. I don't know. No, I don't know anything about that.
Cool. Pass. Please explain the fire pots in Neriac. It asks for a key when you click on the 1 and 3rd gate. Or not.
I do know about them. I don't know that's like, if you could get, I'm almost positive you can get Bill on here. Bill Trost. If you needed me to reach out to him, I can. I'm friends with him. I talked to him obviously most recently at Brad's service, but we also hang out at the beer scene occasionally, him and his wife.
Hit him up for me. I think I've hit him up on LinkedIn. I didn't dare to hit like LinkedIn and Facebook at the same time. I didn't want to be like, you know, that dude. I'm still getting used to this whole thing, right? Like I'm also very self-conscious of like, I feel like I was really an asshole back in the day. So I don't know, you know, like if I'm going to get a response from some of these guys. So if you want to reach out, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I don't think anyone cares anymore. Like,
I don't think so either.
Like 15 years ago, sure, people were like, I don't want to talk to that guy, he's a jerk. But now we all understand where we came from, why we were like that, and we've all grown out of it.
Yeah, I figured it's been forever. So cool. But I was a jerk. Let's see. Nick said, Hobart, thanks for all the care you put into EQ Mac Alcabor during its final years. Can you tell us any fun or interesting stories about working on the server or what happened internally when it went free to play shutdown?
I was hoping someone would ask about that. So that's why I have the banner behind me now. So that banner was from one of our last, even though like it says like New Orleans 2004 on it. We reused those banners in all the Vegas fanfares also. And there was not a single person from Alcabor at the fanfare when they did the giveaway. Like, so basically they were auctioned off, right? So it was auctioned off for like a donation or something like that. And it was like, I think the starting bid was like $50. And so no one bid on Alcabor. Like I think the like Ralazek was the highest one or something like that. So they gave it to me because I was kind of the keeper of Alcabor at the time. Now, how Alcabor came about is a pretty large topic. Do you want to go into that a bit? Because it is kind of interesting, but more for me than it is for probably you guys if you've never played on that server.
Let's go into a little bit at least, because it's come up.
So how that got started, it was probably during Luckland time. It was definitely before Planes of Power launched. And what happened was that someone approached us and said, hey, we want to make a port of, or even the company in general was looking at making a port of EverQuest to the Mac. And unbeknownst to the development team, we were never informed. So this was kind of like a side project by the company. And so what they did was they took the code base and the design content, or actually they didn't even take the design content, just the code base, and gave it to a third party and said, make a port. But they never told the development team. And at this time, this is when Roy's finishing up like the DirectX 9 port of the engine. And so they get the code base and content during mid Planes of Power development. And they port it, they launch a server, and we're like, oh, there's another server. It's the Mac server. And it was a complete mess. The developers never got another code drop the entire time. And it was just horrible. And so this thing was just running, frozen in time, literally. because Planet Time didn't work. And then I inherited it because I'm like, oh, well, I don't even remember what I was doing at the time. I think this was, I'd left to go work at Vanguard. I came back. I was put on FreeRealms, and then and then after FreeRealms shipped and CloneWars shipped, I think or it was during that development sometime, I just got server dumped on me. It's like, hey, CS doesn't want to support it anymore. No one wants to support it anymore. And I'm like, oh, I'll play with it. I'll see if I can get it. And so, yeah, it was, I had my own Mac in my office, and I'd log in and just help the guys as much as I could. Like, they were just basically asking for flagging to work in POP. Like, they could not get flagged. Someone had to come on and basically give them the flag in order for their guild to progress. And I think they were still stuck in tier 2 zones. And so I just went through, and what I did in my spare time was essentially import. By this time, we were using source control and other stuff for design content and code. So I could go back to a very specific point in time, like Planes of Power launch, and grab that content. And then basically all I would do is like, well, your server is so broken, it can't possibly get any worse. So I'm like just hand copying files, because I can't re-export the data, but I can just hand copy files to their production servers and just go repop the zone. I'm like, is that better? And the guild would run through it and be like, hey, we can get flagged now. I'm like, sweet, I'm done for the day. And then every day was like a new roadblock as they went through Plane of Time or Plane of Power progression, and I just helped them get that fixed. The last thing I actually worked on was with Jason Match, because he had done the scripting for Plane of Time at that point, and he was working somewhere else. I mean, this was just not that long ago on the grand time scale, and he helped me one night, like at super late at night, and we went through and fixed the time script, because he told me, he's like, this is how they should work. And I just went through and fixed them all. It ended up being that we had added code at the time so that zones could talk to other zones through scripting. And that code was completely missing from the code drop that Alcabor had at the time. So for that one, I actually had to bring over all the code for our scripting stuff into their code base and then redeploy all their servers, and it worked. And so, yeah, I have a lot of Alcabor memorabilia floating around the house, a whole bunch of unopened boxes, because they have a really unique design for their launch. Like, they got their own box, this white one here.
Push it closer, can you? Right on. Cool. Yeah, no, that's badass. I know people appreciate it. Chat is even saying, like Rolf said, I didn't play on Mac, but that's a cool thing for you to do, Todd. Absolutely.
And it was fun because there was actually something that's never been released or hasn't been really mentioned. I think there's only a few people that know about this. I ever actually got that version of EverQuest to work on an iPad, but when I showed it to Smed, at the time, FreeRealms was the big thing, right? So he's like, well, can you make FreeRealms do this? And I'm like, no. that was a completely different beast. Now, we did end up doing like some weird Mac port of FreeRealms, I think, but it was like just an OS hack level port.
All right. So, and before we get into, we jump that far ahead, we'll take it back, keep it in EQ for a while, because there's still, I think, a lot more to go through there. I'm going to hit a question real quick. Bulork asked, as an engineer, what did you think of MacroQuest Show EQ and what those communities were able to do with it?
my initial response to those was I really hated them. Like, I was not a fan of essentially spoiling the world, giving away all the secrets. Excuse me. But we ended up using them as tools, right? So they helped us find bugs. They helped us show where we could improve, just various different features in the game. And we've hired a lot of, some of the engineers who worked on those. I mean, Roy Altham is, if you ever get Roy on here, which I'm sure would be pretty easy to do, he came to EverQuest because he was in Top End Guild. He wrote macro show EQ, and he just wanted to make everything better. And he helped us fix a lot of those holes in our, I don't want to say security, but we were giving away a lot of information because of Invisible Men, and was like there's like the pound, like there was some information that players could get just from the name of the NPCs, right? And he helped us kind of hide all that because he was at the same time working on Show EQ, but at the same time defeating it, because now he worked at SOE.
Dude, I forgot about the pound. The pound in the name.
Yeah, that's how you made things unique.
Yeah, I was heavily dependent on the pound because of how hacky my shit was. Like the curse definitely wound up with the pound. Robbie, so Robin Yoba, yeah. So this will be saved as a highlight. The VOD will be in with the other VODs, but for sure. So don't worry if you came in late, you missed something. It'll be up there. You'll be able to check it out. And then, like I said, with Todd hanging out around us right now, I think we could probably entice him into a second visit if this one starts to go long and we've only still gone 3 expansions in. But you can stay here as long as you want tonight, dude.
So quick,
go ahead.
The question was about whether or not it was proposed to use the Alcabor server as, the EQ Classic time unlock progression servers, and the answer was it was discussed, like briefly. Really what the issue was is that, yes, we had this code base from 2002, and the design content, which would have been like the ultimate true classic experience, for good or bad, right? So I don't remember when hell levels were fixed, but I think in the version of the Alcabor server, they still existed. And I think I ended up fixing them later. Like, so you get the good and bad. You start losing, you get all the good classic stuff, no revamped zones, classic loot, classic experience bars, classic abilities, classic armor. There was no trade skills. Like, the trade skills didn't have any of the class armor stuff on the server. It would have been hardcore, and it was. And that could be like, that would bring back the nostalgia for a lot of people. But at the same time, it had none of the niceties, like the inconvenient thing. I mean, you still fell to your death if you fell off a Kelethin, right? I just jumped off a Kelethin last night, and I don't even think I took 5 points of damage. So yeah, I'd still love to bring it back just for like a science experiment, but I don't think it would have any longevity.
Yeah. Fair enough. Rolf asked, you said you worked on AA a lot. Did you think AAs would spiral to the extent they have? There were 39,000 plus for Shaman by the time I left 2 expansions ago, and I think it's about 50K now.
I mean, no, I never even imagined it's gotten that high. In fact, on the most recent servers I played was Celos, the last TL server, and then this one. And I kind of avoided looking at the alternate advancement book. Like, my first goal was just to get to 50, and then I'd take a look at it. But I did a lot of the just the back end coding for it. So we had some, looking back, there was some definite holes in how we calculated A levels and stuff like that. But I had no idea it would take off, and I had no idea that it actually would be like a template for alternate progression in general in games. There's always some side character you can progress your character down, or fine tune your character. And we never even considered you would get all the AAs even back then. Like the whole point was it was meant to be like a subclass. So you're going to specialize in this one thing, not specialize in everything. Obviously, as more expansions came out, it became more likely that you're able to get everything.
Because the game kind of felt, and maybe this changed after I left, but it was in a perpetual state of how much longer can this go on?
Yeah. You never knew when it was going to end, so you always. Well, I guess in development, we always thought it was the last expansion until we were told, "Oh, we need another box on the shelf," and then it became the next expansion.
Yeah, it felt like there's a bit of a, well, we know that we're on the curve. We don't know if we're hit maturity and we're riding the, just going to be riding a long tail. And then how long is the company even going to allow us to make expansions, right? Because I think that was the idea too. At least, again, just speaking for myself, it's like, at what point does the company say the entire team moves off this game as opposed to the players leaving?
The intent was that everyone moves to EverQuest 2. There was the belief at the time that 75% of our player base or more would just transition to EQ2 day one. And we were going to facilitate that from an engineering standpoint. We were talking about grandfathering, or creating some type of heritage link to your EQ account. Even though the time was reversed, we were basically going to kind of try to create some type of family link with EQ2, so that there would be an incentive to obviously play EQ if you hadn't already, and then also to switch to EQ2 if you had played EQ. There would be some type of benefit. Obviously, with the time going backwards, that kind of didn't really make any sense.
Yeah.
What was the real percentage? Probably less than 20% that actually went over to EQ2. I mean, at that point, players had such they had committed lifetimes to EQ at that point. People had grown up, gotten married, had kids, named their kids Nagafen, named their kids Fiorina V. You're not just going to leave that, especially if you can't get 100% of your guild to go with you.
Right.
That's probably more of the blocker. It's like, we need 100% commitment from our guild, otherwise we're going to start losing those social bonds, which was the whole point of EverQuest.
Yeah. Yep. And that was a trend that we all saw, right? New MMO comes out, we would see maybe a dip in engagement, but then a month later, 2 months later, those individuals came back, because it was kind of that you send the scouts out to kind of see, are we going to commit to this and take our whole guild, or are we going to come back and keep going? New question. Kemp asked, do you think we'll ever get rid of MacroQuest? Is it MacroQuest 2 on TLP, MQ2? Or would that just cost too much in lost accounts?
I'm not really that familiar with MacroQuest. I'm assuming I don't think you could really get rid of it. I mean, in some other games I play, they've embraced macroing. So I play a game called Tale in the Desert. It's an old school game. It came out like early 2000, like 2001, 2002. There's a number of people that I've played with from the EverQuest team, and they've embraced macroing. So, but their game is also insanely tedious. Like making 10,000 bricks is a pain in the butt. So yeah, you're going to macro it, but you're never going to be able to defeat. From a developer standpoint, you're never going to be able to defeat macroing. Someone's always going to be able to create something that will work no matter what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I had at a previous company, and it wasn't Sony. Had a conversation because the CEO was like, "Hey, man, I keep seeing in the community people are very upset about the bots. We had people that were using pixel bots and all sorts of other bots. The game was very easily bottable. He was like, when are you going to get rid of them? And I was like, we ran the numbers and we can get rid of them today, we think. You'll lose 20% of your accounts. Are you cool with it? And so we never figured out how to get rid of the botters.
Yeah, so here, let me type this. Well, I see a lot of people asking.
Oh, yes, make bricks.
Oh, and I got logged. What? Hold on a second. Why did I get logged out of? I was inactive too long on the stream, so I got logged out.
Of the stream or the game?
The stream. I can see the chat, but it just logged me out for some reason. I'm not sure why. Now I have to probably watch a commercial.
I kicked you out to get that commercial money.
So A Tale in the Desert, they're like on Tale 9. So basically the idea is it restarts, like every tale it restarts and they add some new functionality or change the land a bit. It's a very social, community-based game. Like you can't get anywhere solo. Like if you try to go solo and do your own like nomad, like I'm going to build my house out in the desert, you're going to be hurting. You know, I mean, it takes 20 minutes to travel anywhere. So you definitely want to contribute to a guild, and there's a whole bunch of like public community-based guild you can join that will help you. It's one of those things where if you just need to decompress from work, and you're like, you know what'll do that? A beer and like 10,000 bricks, and that's what happens.
That makes absolute sense, though. Ethan asked Todd to tell what he knew about the test server wipe on June 20th, 2000, and what was the mood in the house.
Yes. I saw that question pop up earlier, and I was like, oh, I don't want to touch that. So that wipe happened because of that rune bolster belt example, where every newbie rat in the game was dropping rune bolster belts, and actually probably Benita probably has some comments to this also. So as developers, we were fairly angry that, you know, oh yes, it's a test server, but people are playing for real on here. And we kind of gave them benefit of the doubt that it was like their real characters. And so they didn't report the bug for a long period of time, to the point where every newbie, every person on the server had a rune bolster belt. So it broke the whole concept of what a test server is supposed to be. It wasn't you know, oh, we're gonna actually, you know, the point of it was that it was supposed to be as real of a server as possible. So it's more like a pre-release server.
Right.
And so you were supposed to respect the fact that you were still doing things for real. But if everyone on the server had max haste and this awesome item, because there was no level restriction on it, then how could we ever properly test content again? Yeah, and I realized that not everyone logged in and didn't have one, but the large majority of the actual testing community did. And like Benita said, it did invalidate all of our testing when we were trying to balance, like, I don't want to say time to kill because that's such a like RTS or BR type concept, but and so the decision was made to just wipe the server, and that was the decision was made because, oh well, it's just a test server. So we had two competing things. It was just a test server, but it was also the test server that people spent the last X number of years playing on, and that was where they had everything. So I don't remember how the actual decision came down to actually wipe it, but yeah, that was pretty brutal. We definitely dealt with a lot of fallout from that because we basically just we screwed an entire community.
Mm-hmm. Which isn't fun. You would think it'd be more fun to do that, guys. It's just never fun.
I don't remember if we did both the items or characters. I think we just did. I mean, if we would have done the item wipe only, it probably wouldn't have been that bad because, you know, we had a thing called as GMs, you know, we didn't have a lot of time to play, or as developers. So a lot of times, what we would do is we would just buff a character to level 50 on live, completely naked, and then just play. And the idea is that anyone could get to level 50, but really your gear was a sign of your accomplishments. And so I would say if we would have just wiped items, it would have been no big deal because the people on that server would have been able to reclaim their items in a very short period of time. So I think we did a full wipe.
Cool. We're reading chat now for those of you listening in.
I'm reading chat too. It's kind of like people are going through the history of what happened. So keep in mind, as developers back then, we were like, there was hypersensitivity to anything. Even during development, the arguments, the fights, the short tempers, the whatever. So it was very easy to come to the conclusion if someone pissed you off, oh, they made us mad, I'll show you, type thing. There was, I'm just going to delete your character. And as a GM, I did that a couple times. Going back to, some of the GM stuff, there was a bug where you could somehow get any low-level character into Plane of Fear. I don't remember what the bug was. And so FOH and a number of guilds had all their twinks sitting in Plane of Fear and just collecting, planes armor that would rot. And of all the work that I tried to do to bring balance to the server in terms of the political landscape, it was one of those things that really, really made me mad. That I asked them not to do this while we fixed the bug, and yet when I called them out, and I'm to say them, it wasn't any particular guild. I told them, it's like, hey guys, log out, get all these characters out of the server or out of Plane of Fear right now, or I'm just going to start wiping your characters. And I literally would just inspect someone and just start deleting items off their character one at a time until they got the picture that I was serious. And I was like, looking back on that, and I'm like, oh man, that was brutal. But that's like, dang, I don't know why I did that, but that's one of the things that I ended up doing.
It was very early in the industry.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it was still that weird border of profession and hobby, I guess, or.
Well, keep in mind, when we were GMs, we were actually the game masters. So we were considered the gods of the server. Our rule of law was that was it. There was no, and each GM had their own rules per server, so general rules, but slightly variations of that rule. And that was when, if you wanted a quest, say for example, people would run up to you and you would give them a quest. Like, we were meant to be the game masters. Hey, all right, so you're a newbie. You came running up to me, you want to do a quest. I'm like, all right, go over here, because we're pretty familiar with the classic world. Go over here, go talk to this guy, go complete that quest, bring me back the item. And I'd be sitting there just answering petitions one day, and that newbie would come back 2 hours later. He's like, Hobart, I got the item for you. And I'm like, oh crap, I was just kind of like telling you to buzz off. I didn't think you were actually going to go complete it. And he'd bring back the item, and I'm like, all right, he'd hand it to me just like a quest NPC. And I'm like, oh crap. Grab open my item book, and I'm like, all right, what would be a great item for a newbie, plus 5 or 10 levels to make him feel like, oh, that was awesome. I'd create an item for his class and drop it back in the trade window and be like, he'd be on his way. But apparently that had a really lasting impression on people, because years later I would get random tells like, oh, do you remember when you did this for me? And I'm like, no, dude, but I'll take your word for it. Here's a stone.
Yeah, Ethan remembers the quest. For Lightstone, and you gave him Combine Longsword, which that's pretty badass. I mean, here you go.
Yeah, and the thing is like you could, it's not like those were rare items or anything.
No.
Or for a newbie who didn't even know that item existed, yeah, it was, and I think it was magical too, right?
Yep.
So they could go knock on some wisps after they got that sword or whatever weapon.
All right. So Zaid asked, is there a single person you think is most responsible for the spirit of EQ, like how it feels and the lore?
I assume we're referring to like original EverQuest, right?
Yeah, I think so. Zaid can confirm.
I mean, between Bill and Brad, um, those core people, Bill, Brad, Steve, Zatkins, Tony, even the original artists, like they all contributed. In the previous discussions, it's like when we created content in that field, the artists and the designer were working hand in hand. They were collaborative, and then if anyone needed engineering support, we were collaborative. Kind of roll my eyes a little bit because there's always a little bit of hey, do this for me, I'll do this for you type thing. But I mean that's the vision TM was from those guys.
Yeah. Todd, I may. Oh no, it looks like it cleared up. I'm wondering if Discord over time degrades and if we should reconnect, but it looks like you're less pixely again, so it could just be a bump in the internet.
It's a little laggy right now. You're like a little bit delayed.
Okay. We'll keep going then until something breaks, or until you need to bail. So let's see. Nick asked, did SOE ever consider using EQMac as a reference client for an EverQuest Classic server, similar to what Blizzard did? Felt like you touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, the answer is yes. Like I said, all the work I did on the Alcabor server to get it like back to having Planes of Power completed and all the flagging working and most of the item bugs and spell bugs fixed, it's all in source control. There's an EQMac folder in Perforce, and it's there. If the team ever wants to resurrect it, the biggest issue is going to be integrating it back into, all the platform systems that have all been, moved forward over the past 18 years. So it's not a simple fire it up and it'll work. I mean, pick zone's not going to be there. There's no instancing. So I was in pick zone 33 last night in Unrest. Like it's not going to exist. So the problem is you're going to have to spin up like 50 servers to handle a population like that, and that's not really doable, I don't think, from a business standpoint.
Cool. And let's see. Turnip asked, Scott Hartzman talked about a unit of time the game used, which was made and named after a dev, the Uzin. Do you recall working with that at all?
Oh, sure. I mean, it was just basically the server tick. But yeah, I mean, I worked with Roger Uzin a lot. Like, I think he was more creative. Like his creative bone was better than his architecting engineering bone. I mean, he could code anything. Don't get me wrong, but how he visioned it and how the code came out weren't always the best for the like long-term maintenance of the product. But yeah, it's just, and then obviously I helped make some of those weird Uzins. You guys talk about the Bible of Uzins. There's probably a couple that I contributed to in there. Most of those were done during expansions. So one of the things why that happened is that our character files, the data we actually stored to represent everything about you, was one binary file. So it wasn't a database. There was no way to add more bag slots because it meant changing the binary format of your character. So a lot of the stuff, that's what we had to reuse functionality, like flying kick of 2, various other parameters in your character file and NPC files because they couldn't change at the time. So that's why a lot of those oozens, like, it's more than just the timer, but it's also about everything else in the game.
That makes a lot of sense. Or it paints a very clear picture, I guess I should say. Let's see. Did you have involvement in EQ2 as well?
No.
There we go. Concise answer.
I know nothing about the EverQuest 2 development. Like I said, my highest level character in EQ is like 24, or EQ2 is like 24. Never. Sorry, I actually take it back. The only thing I was ever involved in was the initial concept meetings. They were held off-site. I think we were in Coronado, and it was just like we would find some gaps within our normal development cycle on EQ, and they'd pull us in and just ask, and we would just kind of like think about it. But I literally do not remember any of the concepts there. I was mostly just brought in for an extra body, it felt like, because I was an engineer at that time. But I think Bill Trost wanted me there, or maybe Roger wanted me there. But it was mainly just high-level design discussions. I really had no input into that whole process.
Right on. And then the last one from behind the scenes, and then I'll be looking at chat. Thanks again, Bunny, for posting these. I really appreciate it. Nanti asked, do you have any patch horror stories?
No, actually I don't. And I think the reason was because of how we patched. Meaning that we never really did these full blanket updates a lot. It was more like, we're going to update this zone, we're going to update these spells, we're going to update these items. So I can't really think of anything that would have been like a horrible story unless someone like jogs my memory.
I remember one because I was in CS still at the time, but I don't know if you know what happened. There was a 2-week period where servers were randomly crashing and rolling back. And it was completely random. And we had to like, yeah, go ahead.
My other computer just randomly turned on. That's always fun. Well, EQ Worlds crashing and rolling back wasn't a new feature.
This was like this wound up having all of us in CS get to work overtime, because it was just like weird bouncing. Not all the servers, not one server, random servers constantly for 2 weeks. If you don't remember, it's fine, but I do remember that period.
So there was a time, but this was before that, because I'm thinking of like the nameless issue, if anyone ever remembers the nameless issue. So these are Windows machines, and basically we wrote all the characters to a file store. It was just a file share. And it's very possible that we were having like file error problems with corrupt drives, and so the issue is, again, going back to how the characters are stored. They're stored in a binary format on disk. And so if your filer goes bad, this actually may have been what the problem is. If your filer starts writing corrupt data, or you have a disk failure or something like that, and you don't fix all that data, every time the character gets read in, it can just cause your processes to crash, because you're essentially just reading in garbage memory. And I think that could be what it was, because I think what we had to do is go through and write a program that would find all these bad characters and then restore them from like last week. Because anytime one of those characters would log in, it would crash the server. And so it was just kind of random. Like, I think once they crashed the server once, like we would delete their character and then they would have to petition to get it restored, which would fix the problem. But, you know, back then you just have random people logging in from months ago and it would just crash again.
Right on. All right, so we've got the last question that's actually back here now, but we also have a lot of timeline ahead of us. I know for a fact, man, I don't want to impose on you sitting here for like 4 hours for us to get through. So I know for a fact that we can break it and have you come back and cover more. But like I said, we'll go as long as you're comfortable.
I'm here all day. For my
Cool.
day-to-day is just monitoring email to make sure my current job doesn't blow up, and then I have to run to the bank at some point. That's about it. So
Right
I'll
on.
just be playing Quest the rest of the day. So I'm good for a while.
Cool. So Nick asked, was there ever any consideration on bringing EverQuest to a new game engine? I'm assuming that's original EverQuest, not the additional projects that we're talking about in chat right now.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that was ever considered, given how proprietary everything was with EverQuest. There were no other engines to use. Like, everything was written for EverQuest. I mean, you could in theory write a translator to load up assets, but you would gain no benefit from the new engine. You'd have to reauthor all those assets for using shaders and textures and all that other stuff. You might as well just make a new game at that point.
Right. Do you know by chance the history behind the Bard class? Who was responsible for the Bard class? Who implemented it? Song system, etc.
No, actually, I don't. That would be a good question for one of the original developers. Like, I think that would be obviously Bill would know, but I think that's more of a Zatkins thing. I mean, he was the spell guy. It feels like it would have been him.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong.
I only met GZ a couple times, I think mainly in passing, and so but he's on the list of, I know that him and Ryan Palacio.
I'm almost positive he would come online.
Yeah.
He would do an interview. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. It'd be really nice to get some of those guys I honestly didn't get a chance to meet much on here as well. I know folks would have a lot of their questions answered from that period. So now that we're kind of caught up on questions, timeline wise, all right. So Velius, then Planes of Power, and I mean there was a bit of a shift during that period, and I don't know, did you leave? When did you leave?
So before we jump into that, did you want to touch more on some of the stories with Luckling?
Oh God, yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, Luckling.
You reminded me of the mount discussion the other day, and I had totally forgotten about that. But again, as I've mentioned multiple times in this stream, I'm always a proponent of the commoner, of the casual player, and so that's where that horse price argument came from. Like,
I forgot we called you out on that. I think it was Rich that called you out on that one. Yeah.
So the daily email thing. I saw Ryan's. What was that? It's probably funny. Someone probably has some of my daily emails. You know, when I left SOE, I archived my entire mailbox. Yes. And I think I still have those somewhere. I don't know where though. But yes, worked on horse shit. That was pretty much every day. Getting horses to work in that game was a nightmare. Because we had to deal with old models and new models. And half the time when you spawned your damn horse, you were like riding inside of it. It's just like, it just looked horrible. Like, the majority of the time. And then eventually, like, you know, I think Steve and I were doing a lot of the bug fixes related to that. But there is code everywhere that basically says if on a horse. Because I mean, everything had to be different. There was no like, you had to play a certain animation and it still looked like crap because your robe was going through the horse, or you were looking into the horse's head and all you saw was his eyeballs. Like, everything was just a mess.
Yeah. So, first of all, Break the Bank, you're on notice. Second of all, hate that the horses start slow and then take off. Boom, you're in a wall.
That again, that was the compromise. I don't know if it was a compromise was the right word to use back then. Capitulation. Like, we were fighting to make them fun, and also at the same time not too realistic and not overpowered. And so everyone, I don't remember where the idea of the ramp up and ramp down speed was. I hated it personally because, like you said, you end up in a wall, and then you have to like basically run into the wall for like 5 seconds while you try to get your horse to slow down. Oh, so horrible.
Yeah. Blue Steel Wheels, I think we covered that. I don't know if you were in here at the time, but I felt like we covered that question earlier with regards to revamps. So if you weren't here at the time, check out the VOD when I post it later. Miami Rice, we've talked about that a little bit before. I will say that I was lead on the team during that, and we did have a lot of discussion about the impact on the social aspects of the game when we included the pop books. But by that point, we were already seeing that the game had kind of moved on and there was a massive generational gap. We can talk about that more outside of this. Unless, Todd, you wanted to add something that maybe you haven't heard us tackle with regards to plane of knowledge.
I mean, it is a byproduct of everything else that was happening at the time. I mean, WoW was doing its thing. You know, our boats obviously still had issues. I mean, they're not even in game anymore. Teleporting was, you know, druid ports and wizard ports was still one of those things where you had to, like, you know, find someone.
That was the challenge, really.
Yeah, not everyone was open to that, right? You couldn't just send a message to a random wizard or druid and be like, hey, I need a port. Like, they could be raiding, they could be doing other stuff. And there wasn't a system for doing that. So we knew it would be difficult for people to travel through that much content. So POK became, you know, the next major hub, just like Shadowhaven and the Nexus was, where everyone could get there quickly and then start digesting the content. Not even to mention like spells, right? So I was just collecting my druid spells yesterday, and I had to go through 4 spell vendors in different areas of the world in order to get just, you know, my level 16 to 18 spells. So plane of knowledge became that thing where, hey, let's just provide a one-stop shop for all your spells.
And a lot of what we were running into too was a lot of discussion during that period that folks may or may not remember. And I'm not saying it's the right way to do an MMO or whatever, but there's a lot of discussion about, hey, I can't play because it takes 2 hours to do anything. How do I get in, get where I want to go, especially as a new player, in 30 minutes and do something? And so POC created social friction, at least in a hub, where you may actually see a high-level player as a low-level player once in your lifetime. And then the other thing too was like, how do I get in, meet my friend who is at a different starting city and play? And then that went to Eldon with, you know, basically the instance group dungeons and stuff. So
yeah, I mean, like, as my druid on Eridune, I'm at the level now where I get bounced between South Row and Unrest constantly. I think I'm finally getting Southern Row, but I literally ran South Row to solo Gators, and then someone sends me, hey, you want to come to Unrest? I'm like, crap, I just came from there. All right. I don't have my port spells yet because I couldn't find the stupid vendors. I finally had to go look on the internet. And so I run my butt back. and thank God the boats are gone. Otherwise, using the teleporters, and it took me like 10 minutes to get back. So my group was waiting on me 10 minutes. So that's like one of the reasons is just we wanted people to get to where they wanted to go quickly. Now, there was a side benefit, and that is the whole buffing thing, right? With mass group buff, other aspects of that, high-level players could contribute to power leveling newbies passively. So there was that whole social aspect of, people would announce, hey, mass group buff on a general channel in 15 minutes. And every newbie, no matter where you were, could get to Plane of Knowledge in 15 minutes or less, because there was always a book nearby. And they'd run to Plane of Knowledge and get their MGB, and then go back to their newbie zone and just wreak havoc on the area, right? And that was awesome for them.
Cool. Chat. I have a actual like problem with. I never get sarcasm. It's funny. Jasmine laughs all the time. I don't get it. So I've learned to always read everything as a positive. So if you say something is good, I'm just going to take it as a good. Now you know. Let's see. It's the way my brain works. Nils asked, what was a conscious decision to start deviating away from the archetypical monsters from D&T, etc., as more expansions came out, or was that a natural progression as you felt certain mob types were exhausted or overused already? Also, would the dev GM teams play D&D together or at all, or is it EQ all the time?
What was the first part of the question about mob types? I don't remember. You mean like just a reuse of models versus like creating new ones?
Kind of going away from like the standard classic mobs to like inventing new crazy stuff.
I mean, we had a lot of creative freedom, so I mean, I think people were just bored of the same old crap, right? You can only reuse bats so many times before you got to come up with something else, or whatever. So yeah.
That's.
Oh, and by the way, being a GM, I have a pretty thick skin, so I don't care if you guys are like, oh wow, Hobart, that really did suck. I'd probably agree with you right now from when it was initially implemented. So, and don't bother me.
Let's see. Okay, cool. So I think we're caught up there. Other Luckland things.
So you brought up a couple incidents in passing. One of them I'll bring up, and that is the Halloween incident. And I think this actually happened in your office. So remember, I think it was you or Lawrence placed that spider on the outside of your office.
Maybe, but what I'm remembering now is the thing that made noise. There's like a thing that was like.
Yeah, I thought it was one of.
Maybe it was a spider. I just know what ultimately happens to it. I don't want to ruin the ending. Whatever it was made of plastic. It made noise. There was motion, and it was hanging up. Yeah. It wasn't me that put it up there, though.
So I'm pretty sure it was Lawrence. And the ending of the story is the best because he made money off of it. But the idea being that, whatever reason, it scared John when he walked by, and it was one of those late evenings, and he was pissed, like thoroughly pissed. And he says the F word a few times, walks over to his cube, and we're all there, and all of a sudden we hear like banging around in this cube. He's opened up file cabinets, and he walks back over to that thing, takes it off the wall, and smashes it with a hammer. Now, first of all, everyone's like, WTF, who has a hammer in their cubicle? First of all, that sounds like a problem. And then he hands Lawrence $20, and he's like, here. And Lawrence was like, sweet, the thing only cost me like $3. But it was one of those like, oh my God, I'm working with psychos. Like, I'm going to get killed in this office. Who knows what else people have in their desk drawers?
Empty liquor bottles. So yeah, that was interesting. It was one of but it was kind of normal. It was oddly like it was not normal, sure, but it was kind of normal when something like that happened. It was like, oh shit, there is that intensity, like, oh, that's not supposed to happen, but that kind of does happen. And so, all right, well,
everyone was just so busy they just had to get back to work. So you're like, oh, someone can fall over dead next to you and be like, all right, well, we got him out of the cube and the ambulance came, but we have to go back to work. Like it was just like one of those things where we had priorities. Definitely not the mental health of people there.
yeah, it was tough times. And I don't know if you remember, but that did happen. They didn't die, but they did. There was an individual on a different team that we won't name names. So I do remember someone being picked up by an ambulance at one point, and just kind of like, oh wow, that's intense. But yeah.
It wasn't the smasher was not Smedley.
No, the different John.
John.
When you said John, I was like, oh, we should probably clarify that at some point.
There was another incident that I'm probably not going to repeat unless you want to contribute to it, where I got really, really angry one night. And I might have gone into someone's office and yelled at them really, really loud, such that I think the entire floor heard.
Was it about food?
No.
Okay, this was a different time then.
So the reason why I snapped was because if you kind of already heard, I'm a proponent of the casual player. I fight for people, like, as a technical director, I fight for my employees. Like, I call management out on their bullshit. Like, that's why some managers love me, is that, I don't sugarcoat anything. And I'm being like super politically correct in here, like you are. But man, something just rubbed me wrong. I don't want to go into details, but I lost my shit. And I know you heard it. And I could probably like text it to you and you'd be like, oh yeah, that incident. But basically that was just one of those things where I felt like we were being abused, like more so than normal. And I called bullshit and I made sure everyone knew about it. Even the poor artists that were probably had their headphones on heard me. So, that's me. I will always go to bat for you.
Yeah, I respected that. I mean, I was like a shell-shocked young aspiring game designer at the time. And I'll be honest, man, when I got there, I didn't know if you'd been on the team 10 years or, a year. I just knew that you were established, you called bullshit on things, and people respected you. So I was just gonna kind of go with it. But yeah, there were a couple times. I can't place that specific one. You'll have to send me a message at some point. But I know there are a number of other ones, and maybe it overlaps, where you called bullshit, and one. Okay, so this goes back into the weird thing with like the hammer. On one hand, it may seem crazy that you had to. On the other hand, it was so normal that something like, if there was some yelling about some shit and like, hey, this is bullshit, blah, 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 that's just kind of how we operated. And then, like, it wasn't like a thing where it's like everybody freaked out. Now I remember some of them for sure, forever, but it was just kind of like, it was honestly one of the most just sort of adrenaline filled, intense periods. And at the time, I thought that's the way it was always going to be. And over time, it stopped. But yeah,
that was not. I mean, you're right. Like we operated more like a dysfunctional family than we did like coworkers, right? So I mean, we could yell at each other, like get in fist fights, wrestling matches, whatever. But the next day, we're all going to lunch together. We're all going to dinner together. Like, I don't remember too many times where there was like people who took it really personally, or if they did it kind of like, whatever, it's been a week, they're fine now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. The let's see. So from Lucklin, we'll come back to Lucklin stories as they come up, but there was that transition then where, I mean, when you think about it, that period of like launch EQ to when people started leaving to go to Sigil, that's a fairly compressed amount of time. That's only a few years, but it felt like history was accelerating so fast during that period that those were very dense years. They were very dense years for the company, for gaming. And so there was a big shift in, I've always felt like we were kind of like second wave, but as I hear more of the stories, maybe we were wave 2.5 or even 3 on the team. You know, those of us that came up through the apprentice program. Can you explain sort of your perspective on what was going on during that?
After Legacy of Yukisha and Eldon, I think I did a little bit of work on Gates of Discord. So I remember the people who were there around that point, but I think I was frustrated from a career standpoint. You have to remember, I think at that point, I was still an associate programmer or a programmer 1 after like 3 years. And I was like doing tons of work, you know, and we had just started rolling in some of the new management. You know, this is when Pfister came in. I mean, he came in after I think it was Loveline, right? But Pfister chewed me out. He blamed everything that was technically wrong with the game on me one time, and I just laid into him. Like I think I broke down in tears because I was like, dude, you don't realize the passion we put into this product. And you come from casual games, which aren't really games. Like I'm kind of devolving to anger Todd, right? And I'm like, how dare you criticize my team and the work we did? We're the one paying the bills. Like, I was so angry. And I think I actually got him to step back, and he apologized to me because, you know, he didn't understand. He didn't have any visualization on how much effort we were putting into this product and what type of horrible management decisions we had. I mean, horses came in like 11th hour. That was one of those direction type things. But yeah, I was around till Gates of Discord, but I honestly don't remember much from that. I think I was at that point either not happy with what I was doing because I was not part of the creative process anymore. I got removed. So when the new management came in, and I think this was right after Scott left, Scott Hartzman, there was a clear line made between designers and programmers. Programmers no longer could provide feedback or do creative content, and programmers had to implement what designers wanted. Even designers that were doing bad things, right? So I mean, it was just like I could not take a zone and go do that anymore. Like, I lost all that creative freedom. And that's when I realized that part of EverQuest during that time frame was now about churning out expansions and not really about, you know, what I came to love and why I came to work in SOE. So I saw an opportunity. You know, Lawrence had already left to go to Sigil. Numerous people that we went through that whole cycle with had left. Steve Clover, a whole bunch of other people. And so they reached out to me one day and they're like, hey, we know you're not happy. We want you to come work at Sigil. And I'm like, done. Like, it was a very informal process. There was like, my interview process was literally, hi, I'm Todd. Hi, I'm Todd. And that's it. And they're like, you're hired.
Because you already knew most of those guys, right? I mean,
yeah, it was just an informal process to meet like new people who were just new to Sigil and had never been associated with SOE. Yeah.
Cool. And then, so the sigil experience, we haven't gone into a lot of detail there. I think the only person that was on that team was Bill when he was in, and we touched on it a little bit, but not a lot. Is there some insight you want to provide there? Or?
So I was mainly brought in to help with the backend server part. I mean, remember we were using like Unreal 2.5 or 2. Like they really didn't have a concept of an MMO engine at all. And so Vanguard had these massive cities, this massive world, and they're like, dude, we can only get like 50 players in one of these mega cities, which is a problem because there was like 4,000 NPCs in these cities. So yeah, I did a lot of the back end stuff just to squeeze out whatever I could out of the Unreal Engine back in the day. Because remember, it's night and day between that engine and what is Unreal today. Back then, it was literally just loop over everything in the game and the engine and see if it needs to do work. You can't really do that with, I think it was like in some of the cities, like Call, or was like there's like 500,000 objects in those cities with thousands of NPCs and then hundreds of players. It just did not function. I mean, if we got 1 frame a second on the server back end, we were happy. That was actually okay for a city zone.
Yeah, it was a massive challenge. I can't speak to the specific technical aspects of it, but I know that when we were doing DC Universe in Unreal 2.5, it was like that 2.5 to 3 period. We were doing it with the guys in Seattle were also using it for theirs, the agency. And it was like, so we were doing DC, the agency was using it as well. And I think Sony had an initiative to just sort of help them make an engine that would work with it. And man, it seemed like we spent years just trying to get it to do basic MMO stuff.
No, it was definitely not a good choice. Like I said, for Vanguard, I ripped out most of, it wasn't really recognizable as Unreal at that point on the back end.
A question just came in related to that. I think you see it right there. It's the bottom question. In hindsight, do you think it would have been better to build an engine from the ground up for Vanguard or keep using Unreal?
Well, so yes and no, but I think you could have gotten away with 2 separate parts. From the engine standpoint on the client side, I think it definitely accelerated the development process initially with just art creation. Really, what I remember the big issue is that we made a lot of proprietary changes to the Unreal Engine to support what we needed. And what that did was it kept making it more and more difficult for us to keep up with Unreal's development.
Yeah.
So as Unreal rolled out, 2.5, 3.0, added features, we weren't able to take them anymore. We had completely forked our engine for the most part. And I think in the long run, that really did hurt us because we were not able to collaborate with Epic anymore on features, whether it would be including, redoing how we do like the MMO aspects of it. We were never able to collaborate on those and provide any code back to them. And probably it was a licensing issue because we worked for Microsoft, and Microsoft probably claimed they owned everything. But yeah. Anyways, I would have said the best route would have been Unreal for the client, no problem, art development, everything else like that, and a completely new server backend would have been better than trying to use the Unreal Engine as a server engine.
Yeah, I mean, as a tool set, like when we first hopped in there and we're doing prototyping and things like that, I loved using Kismet and Matinee and things like that at the time. But it seemed like by the time we got back into it for what we were actually going to do, everything had been gutted for us, at least on our project. I had no access to Matinee or Kismet, blueprints these days, I guess. And it was just kind of like, oh, so this is essentially a renderer. Like it's all the things that I was hoping to use weren't there as a designer. Yeah. So, how long were you there?
So I came in, I think it was around 2005. I think it launched in 2007, if my memory serves me. So I spent about 2.5 years there. So when we launched, obviously we launched as a SOE product at that point. So part of that whole agreement was obviously we wanted, SMED wanted people back. So it was very personal to him to reunite the teams back under SOE. So when Vanguard was brought back to SOE, I was actually became the lead engineer, technical director on Vanguard, and we got downsized to a fraction of the team. We worked on the trial island, tried to get the newbie experience fixed and optimizations, and try to um, relaunch the product. And it had like a little bit of a revitalization, but really it was just for all intents and purposes, I feel like it was more of a technical disaster than the content. I still love it. Like I still have fond memories. Everyone brings up diplomacy. I was a crafter. I loved crafting. I love the whole what was it? Not salvage, but they had a whole salvage mechanism, which is like essentially your reverse crafting. People would send me crap all day long in the mailbox, and then I would recycle it and send it back to them. And I did a lot of those features. Like I did a lot of the coding for housing for I did like the auction house. I did the whole thing. I mean, the documentation around what the housing system was supposed to be, like we only scratched maybe like 1/10 of the surface. Like those housing zones, if you guys played it, like around the cities, you were supposed to evolve your housing area into a district, or like you would start with a village, and then you would get like a small city. You'd belong to a district, and basically you could level up your housing, your whole area. And then we were going to have NPCs attack your housing. You'd be able to put up like towers. Like there's just tons of stuff that was completely unheard of in a static world environment. Remember, when you bought a house, you owned part of the world. It wasn't like an instance anymore. It was just, and that was one of the visions for Vanguard. It was that everything is, part of the world. I think there was a pretty strong negative reaction to instancing at the time, because that's probably when WoW had to start doing instancing, and there was some definite backlash on that on the development team.
Yeah, I because I remember when we put instancing in for Eldon, there's definitely concerns raised, even from folks that weren't on the team any longer. But again, at the time, we felt like that was the direction to go in. It solved problems, and yes, it was going to introduce some new ones, but we hadn't really seen those new ones firsthand yet. So there you go. So I could see that with Vanguard. Yeah, Ethan, Anarchy Online was doing instancing probably first, but as we mentioned in some previous ones, I could have sworn that they were doing single player instances that were procedurally generated at the time. And then we hopped on it as a solution for some of the problems we were running into in the live game and with Pop. So it was we saw it as a stone that could hit several birds at once, including providing content for more casual gameplay, etc., stopping zerging, so things like that.
I see a mention of boat building. Yes,
Yeah.
that's Steve Clover's pet projects. I mean, you're right. Boats, like building your first boat and then being like, I'm just gonna sail around. That was an awesome experience. Um, is Vanguard completely dead? I know there's the emulation project out there. If they complete anything very able to complete any amount of it to get towards what Vanguard was, I'd be shocked. That was such a huge amount of content behind it. I'm secretly optimistic that Vanguard might make some type of comeback. I would definitely love it. Like I was at SOE up until June of last year, and I actually was talking to Brad at the time about Vanguard and what they were doing at Pantheon, and I fired it up on my PC at work, and it's amazing how much better the hardware deals with that game now. Like there's no loading times transitioning between areas. It's instantaneous. It feels like a different game. But again, you have to remember, like client side alone, yeah, you can do that, but the back end tech would require a significant amount of resources to get back into, like, just if you think of a cloud architecture or just working with Daybreak's platform systems would take, a decent amount of time. So no one views it as worthwhile.
Fair enough. There's a question that came in. Gypsy Prince asked, do you think there will be a new MMO that captures the same essence of EQ?
No. You have to. EQ was, for new people, maybe they might have some sense of that in different games, but for the EQ people, you'll never be able to convince them that it'll be a new EverQuest. I see, mention of EverQuest next, and yes, I did work on that for like 2 years. It was called Landmark at the time. I don't think I have anything out. I kind of don't want to talk. I mean, it's not that I don't want to talk about it. It's just it's not something I'm excited to talk about. Like Landmark was painful from a development cycle. It brought back all the worst aspects of Luckland with none of the team building. So it was really annoying. But yeah, you can't recapture something like that. Like you would have to bring someone into the world that's never experienced virtual anything, like a 3D world. You have to bring someone back from some island somewhere where they don't even know phones exist and put them in front of a virtual world like EverQuest, and then they might have that feeling. But for us, that's just a normal day now, so it's not going to come back.
Yeah. Man, just kind of sitting with that one for a minute. I just kept thinking of like the 80s as well. It's like nothing's going to feel like the 80s to me. We were talking about that on a stream the other day. I'm like, I don't even understand. I was like 11 at the time. Like, why was my heart broken when Aha was singing, that music video? It's like, dude, I didn't even have a heart yet. I was like, I don't think I got issued one of those till I was like at least 12 or 13. But sure enough, man, the nostalgia hits, and it's very much the same thing for me and EQ. It's like just massive nostalgia.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier, like I started out with working on a mud and off of Circle Mud. It's actually, it might still be out there. It was made by some of my best friends. It's called The Realms of Tremeria. And it was a Circle Mud, and we ran it at our server at our internet cafe. We had a T1 line, so it was like everyone played on our mud because there was no lag. I mean, everyone, as in like there was probably like 10 people playing it, right? So it was in perpetual beta. It was never released. I don't think it got listed on any of the major boards. But when you go from that to experiencing phase 3 beta of EverQuest, that blows your mind. And that's where you kind of get that, oh, well, you dream in text, and then all of a sudden you can actually see your dreams like sit there in front of you. You can see, Kinos. Kinos is a vast city. It's a massive city, but it's not. It's just from a visualization standpoint, it's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how you wind up driving and joining a company 2 weeks later, like when the call comes in, right?
You're like, what? I mean, this is the thing, right? You're just like, I don't care what I'm doing right now. I'm going to drop everything. I mean, I literally told my mom, hey, I'm leaving to go to California. I went and bought a new car because my car would never make the drive out there. I've never flown before, so I wasn't going to fly out there. I drove into San Diego. I remember coming in on the 8th and going, okay, like there was no phone to look at maps. Like I have to find the Verint office by actually pulling over somewhere and looking at a physical map, and driving up the 805 to the 5, or like just right off there on, we're off Miramar Road, and then pulling up to the building going, holy crap, I'm here. Like,
Yeah.
what do? Like you buzz the door and then someone answers and they come down and pick you up, and it's like, I'm here. And they're like, they set you down and like, oh, we have a seat for you. And crazy.
Yeah, my heart was racing so much.
I didn't even know where I was sleeping when I landed. Like when I got there, I had no place to sleep. And luckily, like I said, the whole team is like, oh, well, you can just sleep on our couch or sleep wherever until we figure things out.
Yeah, I had 3 days. I had a U-Haul that I could only afford to keep for 3 days, and I had enough money to maybe get an apartment. And so I had a girlfriend, 2 cats, I think maybe a snake. I thought I brought him with me, and a U-Haul full of stuff with my little SUV strapped to the back of it. And I essentially had to I had to do two things: find an apartment and go up and actually see if they were hiring. Like, and I hit Dave Neville up in IRC and was just like, "Hey, dude, I'm actually out here." And he was just like, "I thought you were joking." I'm like, "I'm here. Do you think I can apply for a job?" And he's like, "I'll ask Michelle."
You know what? If it wasn't for Michelle,
Yeah.
like, there's that person who just is the nicest person, who will do anything for you, who will give you every opportunity possible, and that is Michelle. And like I said, if she didn't call me that one random day when I was working and I didn't answer the phone, I would have never, known about this job, right?
Mm.
She gave everyone a chance. And Jeff is the same way too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, super fortunate timing for me, like I look at it and it's like, man, how did all that shit line up, and how were those people there, right? Like, for this is meant to be sort of, so to look back on our discussion so far, it sounds crazy, folks, and there's some crazy shit and there's some yelling or whatever, but dude, I'm so happy that that opportunity existed. I'm so happy that the original crew and Schmidt and all those guys made the game. First of all, that blew my mind. But to have, like, to be able to meet Dave and have him be like, cool, I'll ask Michelle, and to have Michelle actually be cool and like give me the chance, like meeting Jeff and the team and all the folks at the time, like none of this is in any way casting a shadow on anybody. Crazy shit happened, but dude, thank God. Otherwise, I literally would not be here in Sweden at the moment. I wouldn't have my girlfriend and my dog, right? Like, none of this.
And you can't do that today, right? So if you just show up at some random studio, they're gonna cart you off in a loony bin. They're gonna think you're some crazy player wanting to do them harm just because of all the past experiences, right? The idea of like, dealing with angry players only became an issue like, I don't know, like when did we really start screwing with stuff in design that really started making players angry? It was probably like not until like Velius or Luckland. Like I felt like most things were pretty positive from the player standpoint until we started screwing with stuff.
Random bannings. There were those random guys that would show up or threaten to show up. We had one guy show up, but the people that met him at the door, I think, dissuaded him from wanting to stay. He got real cool, like Andy and a few other folks. We all
Yeah, and that's the other thing is like people didn't really know how to react. Like once they probably saw those guys are like, oh crap, you know, I'm now actually talking to the devs. And that's the same thing that's like when we went to fan fairs. We were like, oh god, the players hate us right now. Abashi's dealing with, you know, the forums, and we go fanfare, and it's, yeah, they might, you know, corner you and, you know, ask you questions that might make you uncomfortable for 5 minutes, but then they're like, oh, but this thing over here you did was so awesome, and then they change their, they're like, can I buy you a drink, right? Because you, even though I'm really pissed at you for doing this, like you helped me these 5 other times, and then like I've never, I shouldn't say never, later on, like in late SOE fanfares, I did feel uncomfortable getting cornered a couple times. But really at that point, you just kind of realized that some people, EverQuest was their life. It was changing. They weren't happy. They didn't know how to deal with it. But early in those early days, it was fine.
Cool. Let's see. I'll read this question off. But while I'm taking a quick pause, EQ Mule, thank you for the follow. Tinaran04, Get Lost Greg, Dimebag Darnell, and Chambers 12. Thanks, guys, for being here. Miami Rice says, Free Luckland was the best EQ in my opinion. The direction EQ went with Luckland Plus changed the whole landscape of the game. Was there heavy advocates to not go the Luckland route?
I don't remember specifically. I think the vision had kind of started changing at that point. And when I say vision, I mean the vision TM vision. There was definitely less oversight from Brad and Bill and some of the other senior ones at the time. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree with the way it went after. Well, I would say later than Luckland. What was it like? What was it Gates of Discord, the one that was just like the crazy power curve? I think Ryan was talking about that the other day. Again, that was that expansion, or was it Gates? What was the one that was just an insane power jump for NPCs?
I think that's the one we were discussing with Gates, with both. Ryan, did Rich hit on that? I don't know that Rich did, but I know Ryan hit a little bit on that.
See, that was that expansion totally went against what I feel is appropriate for a game, right? So I'm all about the common guy, and there was no way some casual player is going to walk in there and even like kill trash. Like, you know, you needed a small multi. I feel like some people need to do multi groups to kill some of that crap initially.
It was thank you, Bunny. Akil just talked about it. Yeah, so and he was the one that was also just sort of pointing out some of how that happened. With regards to timing, what made it in, what didn't make it in, what was expected. And I do think what I was thinking about when I was picturing discussion with Ryan was, and Rich are covering just the sudden change in team composition then when Scott, Rich, and I got sort of yoinked over. Yeah, so.
Yeah, well, I think I now that I think about it, when you guys got yanked off the team, I seem to remember having a very negative reaction to that, because I'm like, you know, I don't remember our dynamic specifically, but I remember having a very positive working relationship with you guys for the most part. I'm sure there was always an exception to the rule, but I felt it was kind of like a bullshit moment to yank off you guys to work on this new product when really this game, EverQuest, I felt at the time was still had tons of room to grow. From I know everyone was like, oh, WoW's out, you know, EverQuest is dead, but the numbers really didn't bear that out too much. People, yes, they went to play WoW, but they didn't really leave EverQuest. They kind of just silently paid for their sub for the next very long period of time. And as a developer, we were all very grateful for that.
Yeah, and again, it kind of goes back to that whole looking back. We know now. I mean, I'm sitting in the game 21 years later. But there's always that feeling of, again, how long does this last, and how do we safeguard the company best by? So at the time, my reaction was poor. But when I look back, and I've sort of seen it with other MMOs, I mean, because I've just only worked on MMOs since then, it's gotten easier with hindsight to go, hey, if you've got a flagship title, look at how you can reinvest in that title, maintain the longevity, like what is the best way to potentially rebuild systems, or look at examples like RuneScape and other companies as well that have really, shown, hey, you can keep this going for quite a while. I think CCP with Eve is showing some good examples of that. But 20 years ago, I really do have the feeling that folks were really worried that, like, hey, if we don't get people to buy into our next thing, they're going to quit EQ at some point. And we'd rather they don't go somewhere else.
Yeah, and like there wasn't really a huge push to revamp the game, like from like what Blizzard does with WoW. Like they pull it off, revamping the old world, better than obviously I think any game out there that I'm familiar with. And that wasn't something that at the time the company wanted to chew on. Like Antonica in original Noreth was massive in scale. Like how do you re-envision that within the same product and have people not get hugely angered? And it was because we weren't used to change. Like players never got accustomed to change. Had we done something on a regular basis that changed the world so that players felt like it was ever evolving, then perhaps we would have been able to pull it off. But instead, we just kept pushing out expansions and left the old world old and outdated at the time, and everyone, it was just expected everyone moved to the expansions.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of good learning there. This was a discussion that we're having a lot at my last company, even because the game that I got when I got there, the game was like 7 years old. It only had 20 levels of gameplay, so super shallow, but it was still just linear growth year after year. And the girls that were playing it would make their own content in a sense, right, and treat it like a sandbox. The thing was, they never really had the opportunity to grow it very big. So it always had a nice social feel to it. And I was like, guys, this is good. Like having seen a game that builds the universe out to the point where you'll never see the people on the far edges if you come in the beginning, unless you click the make me level 200 button. Like it's I think that's a better direction to go. It's just, we didn't really know that at the time.
Yeah, I agree. That's why there was always that general pushback about expansions every 6 months.
Yeah.
Because it's like we're we have this rat race with content, and we're never going to win against the people who are playing 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. But yet at the same time we kept creating content for them. And obviously we did some work for everyone. Like Dan Enright, if you remember him, he worked on a lot of the crafting quests for class stuff. He did a lot of, like, he was kind of in my corner of the philosophy of creating content for the casual player, something that was accessible by everyone. Because not every, the percentage of people who actually went to the planes or did the super raid content was so small compared to like the actual size of the player base.
Right. So, Todd, we have just hit the 3-hour mark.
I'm just looking through the questions to see if there's anything, obviously don't want to necessarily, this is an EQ stream, but
well, let me correct that. It's a stream that allows us to get together, talk about EQ with people that are passionate about EQ. But the thing I found almost instantly was people were discussing EQ, EQ2, Vanguard, Pantheon, like the other MMOs. And because of all the links, you guys have worked in different places, AOC, all of this stuff. It was kind of cool because I was immediately like, right on, this will be a variety stream rooted heavily in EQ. But yeah, so I think all of the topics are fair game.
Hold on a second. I think one of my kids is coming in.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, I only got a few more minutes. I'm gonna watch the kids while the wife does some errands. So yeah, we should definitely catch up. There's some more stories. I actually got some props behind me. Got some stories behind them. So yeah, let's touch base again.
So yeah, let's do that. I tell you what, we'll wrap up today. We'll hop on a Discord, and if not tonight, depending on when I wrap up here, I may be crashing out. But we'll hop on Discord. Let's talk about getting you on for another one, and we can frame.
Just fire them over to Sean, and then we can kind of try to remember and get some of those stories talked about.
Yeah, Bunny's been trying to get me to make like a questions channel in our Discord, which I've got to figure out the best way to do it. Should it be free form where people send them to us and then we put them in there so people know what's coming? But we'll start gathering up questions. You think about the stories that you want to hit on next time. We have a nice stopping point with your return to SOE, and then we can talk about what happened after that.
Cool.
And I think we'll have plenty of material for another 3 hours coming up in the not too distant future.
Sounds good.
Awesome. All right then. Todd, it's been fantastic. Thank you for popping on. Say hi to everybody for me, and I'll hit you up as well about some people to follow up with.
All right, cool. Take care.
Man. Yep. See you. Thanks again, dude.